Hello and welcome to another video from Old Frames Gaming. I'm your host BK, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at some pre-modern action that's going to feature Chris on the Solution versus Joe on Enchantress. Let's jump into the deck list. And here we have Chris's deck. He was on the Solution for the night, or Angel McAngel Face as some folks like to call it. It's a blue, white, red deck that features Lightning Angel at its core, alongside Exalted Angel and Meddling Mage. And then it uses a few elements to help control the board, like Swords to Plowshares and Lightning Bolt and Fire and Ice to kind of help with removal. And then it's got a bit of card draw and some tempo action in Memory Lapse. And then it features a late game finisher in Decree of Justice, which I think is an interesting add. I like this deck. I've never played it. The complaint that I hear most often is that the mana base is somewhat difficult, and we'll see how that unfolds. Let's take a look at Chris's sideboard. Okay, and here's Chris's sideboard. It looks like that he opted to add a few Hydroblast and Pyroblast in order to fend off the red and the blue decks that seem to show up in droves at our shop. He's got another Meddling Mage here to complement the ones already in the main deck. We've got some Pyroclasms to sweep up some of those small creatures that we see from time to time, Disenchants to deal with troublesome enchantments, and a couple of Tormod's Crypts to fight off those graveyard-based decks. That said, let's take a look at what Joe is playing. So Joe was on Enchantress for the night, and as you can see from the list here in front of us, it has a cast of the usual suspects. But Joe is playing some unusual choices here, and I think they're pretty interesting. He's playing a couple main deck copies of Oath of Druids to help him dig out those enchantresses when it's absolutely necessary. But the three replenishes that he is packing there help him get those enchantments from the yard back out into play if we should pass up some that are needed at the time. In his sideboard, he's playing some anti-blue tech. You'll see City of Solitude there, alongside Carpet of Flowers and Choke. He's got a Singleton Tormod's Crypt for those graveyard-based decks again. And he's also running a Worship, which is pretty cool. We saw that in Chris's list as well. Likely again for those red decks that seem to run rampant at our shop. And you'll also see two Circle of Protection reds in there as well. Joe's also carrying an additional Aura of Silence, likely for the off chance that he runs into the mirror, because that does happen from time to time due to the popularity of this deck. Alright, well I think that about gets it for the deck list. Let's jump right into round one, game one action. And as we join our players in game one, Joe is going to be on the right and Chris is going to be on the left hand side of your screen. Chris won the die roll, so he's going to open up on Flooded Strand and go searching for a land and passing the turn over to Joe. Joe took a mulligan down to 5 cards to open this game up. And on his first turn, after taking a draw, he's going to land a Windswept Heath. And it looks like he is likely going to crack that Heath. Having a little trouble finding the 19. So we're going to go digging for a basic land. He finds a Beta Forest. Very nice. Some of you all out there may know Joe from internet fame. He runs a YouTube channel called The Orb. And if you're into old school Magic, I can't encourage you highly enough to go and check it out. Joe does wonderful work over on that channel, and it's super entertaining for anybody who's into that scene. Go and check him out. Give him a like and a subscribe. Recommend him to your buddies. Whatever you got to do to get the word out. So Joe passes the turn back over to Chris, who finds a Battlefield Forge and lands it, and then passes the turn back on over to Joe. He finds a land of some type. I believe that's a Plains, and plays Sterling Grove. We got a Reader. So Sterling Grove is going to give all his other enchantments Shroud. Chris looks like he's got a response for that. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, it looks like it's a Memory Lapse. So that's going to put it back on top. I'm not familiar with some of the special art that is coming out in some of the newer sets these days, so please forgive me for that. So Joe ends his turn, gives it back over to Chris. He's going to rearrange some things in his hand here. He finds a Mistress Factory and passes the turn back over to Joe. So Joe going to give a look to a fresh card here. He finds another Sterling Grove. Or was it the old one? Looks like that thing's going to get memory lapsed yet again. Kind of a time walk here. Joe passes the turn back over to Chris. We get a fresh look. We find a Plains. Looks like he's got a Fire and Ice in hand and a Swords to Plowshares and a couple of unknowns. So Chris is going to bash in for 2, send Joe to 17 and pass the turn. Joe's going to try to play that Sterling Grove one more time, and it looks like it's going to stick this time. And he's going to go ahead and crack it. So we're going to go searching for an enchantment. Joe finds Enchantress Presence. So that's going to allow him to draw a card every time he plays an enchantment. That's going to go to the top of the library. Chris goes ahead and takes his turn to kind of shortcut things here. Looks like we're trying to determine what we're going to do. He's going to take a point off of that Battlefield Forge. And we're going to play a Morph Creature. Looks like that is in fact an Exalted Angel. Nobody tell Joe. He can't know. Chris passes the turn. Joe draws that Enchantress's Presence and plays it. Looks like he's a little bit land-light this game so far. Chris is over here with a 3/3 Morph Creature. Or I'm sorry, a 2/2. Chris told me after the matchup that he had to get some clarification on Morph itself, how it works. No big deal though. So we're just working out our mana issues from that. And resetting our life total. Alright, so Joe's done with his turn. He passes back to Chris. Looks like we may have drawn a lightning bolt for the turn. It's a pretty good start. Just thinking over that Decree of Justice. But that Exalted Angel looks like it might be a pretty good move for this turn. Yep, we're going to go ahead and morph that thing. He's going to crash on in for 4 and gain some life. And send Joe to 13. So Chris is actually going to be at 22 here, but the die only goes to 20, of course. But we'll try to keep track of it as best we can. Joe offering some help here. Gets a fresh look at 1. Still missing our land drops, unfortunately. Alright, so Joe plays Elephant Grass, triggers the Enchantress's Presence, and draws a card. So that kind of works sort of like a propaganda, except it has a cumulative upkeep on it. Joe is floating a green mana off that Wild Growth. And he's going to play an Exploration and draw another card. And it looks like we finally found our 3rd land of the game, so that's good for him. Looks like we're still doing some thinking. Maybe he's got a Seal of Cleansing, but he opts to pass the turn. Chris is going to untap and draw his card for the turn. We found a City of Brass. See, this is what I was kind of talking about. The mana base for this deck is really, really tough sometimes. It's very unforgiving. Very cool deck, though. So you can see in Chris's hand there that he's holding a couple Fire and Ice and at least one Lightning Bolt. And he is deep in the tank here. Alright, so it looks like we're coming across for 4. So Joe is going to go to 9, and Chris is going to be at 26. And he's going to pass the turn back to Joe. Joe's going to untap and let that Elephant Grass go. Not really needing it too much here. Chris going to pay the cost to attack in anyway. So we find a Fertile Ground, draw a card, and there's Sarah's Sanctum, and that thing is going to be supercharged. Right now, just tapping for 4 white mana on its own. So here we're going to add 4 white to our mana pool. And we're going to play another Enchantress' Presence using that 1 green that was floating. Triggering a draw. And if my calculations are correct, I believe that Joe has 2 floating white mana. So now he's going to add a white and another color. And play another Sterling Grove. And draw 2 cards. And this is probably the point at which things get out of hand for the opposing player. These Enchantress decks get to a point where they just have 1 explosive turn and effectively create a soft lock that's almost impossible to get through. And Joe is very much nearing that point. So he passes back over to Chris, who takes a look at his next card off the top. So Chris comes across for 4, sending Joe down to 5 life. I'm sorry. We're going to go 6 across. So Joe should be going to 3. And there's Lightning Bolt. And that is game 1, everybody. We're going to give these two a couple of minutes to sideboard and shuffle up, and we'll join them in game 2. So as we open up game 2 here, Joe is going to be on the play. Chris has taken a mulligan down to 6 cards, and Joe is going to lead off with Windswept Heath. He's going to find a Plains. It looks like he is going to play an Enlightened Tutor. So we're getting to the action real quick here. So Joe's going to go searching for an enchantment. We're going to put that thing on top. Oh, Oath of Druids. So this could get pretty interesting because Chris may or may not be aware of what all Joe has in his deck. Quite often with Oath of Druids, what we're going to see is a Terravore, although I don't think we're going to see that out of Joe tonight, but it will likely find him an Argothian Enchantress, which is pretty good. So Joe's going to go ahead and draw that Oath of Druids and play it. And he's going to pass the turn back over to Chris, who has so far found a City of Brass. And what are we going to drop into play? Chris is giving it a good hard think here. Looks like we've opted to go to Mishra's Factory. And he passes the turn back over to Joe. So, no trigger on the upkeep for the Oath this turn. Instead, we find a Wild Growth and a Sterling Grove, and Joe passes the turn back. Chris may be trying to decide if he wants to memory lapse this, but ultimately does not. Takes his draw, finds his third land, a Plains. Looking over our options here. Staring awfully hard at that portent. I don't blame him. That's a pretty decent card. It's no Brainstorm, but it's the best we've got in Premodern. He's going to take a point. Looks like we're probably going to play that portent. So this actually gives you the option of looking at your opponent's deck if you so choose. But Chris here is going to take a look at the top three. Going to try and get some action going on his side of the board. That looks to be a Lightning Bolt, a Meddling Mage, and a Lightning Angel, I believe. He's going to reorder those. And he's going to let it be. Seeing what other options are available to us. Looks like we're going to crash in for 2 and send Joe to 17. And he passes back. Joe takes a fresh look at a new card off the top. One green. Elephant Grass. Alright, so we basically got a pseudo propaganda going on, at least in the short term. It's going to tie up some of Chris's mana if he wants to keep attacking. I think we played the wrong card there, but that's okay. Looks like he's found another Mistress Factory. Here we go. But that will tie up all of Chris's mana if he decides he wants to come in this turn. 1 to activate and 2 to pay that tax on the Elephant Grass. Got to decide if it's worth it or not. He's going to pass the turn back on over to Joe, who's going to pay the upkeep on the Elephant Grass this time. This deck has all kinds of options. That appears to be a Croson Reclamation. So Joe's going to shuffle some cards back into his library. Chris is going to opt to play a Predict. I don't know what the name was, but it appears that he's only going to draw... Well, he did draw 2 cards because he did know the top, I guess. So... There we go. Off that portent, that is. So now he's going to untap and take his draw off the top. And I believe that cleared everything off that portent. We play a Battlefield Forge. Kind of hesitant to play a creature, I would say, based off of that Oath of Druids, and I don't blame him. Kind of hard to predict what your opponent may have brought in from the sideboard if you're not privy to the deck list. So Chris plays it safe and passes the turn back. Joe lets that Elephant Grass go and draws a card. Three mana for an Enchantress's Presence. Trying to get that card draw engine online. Joe sends it back on over to Chris. Take a look at the top card. It appears to be a Meddling Mage. Again, probably hesitant to play any of those cards, and I really don't blame him for that. Thinking about firing up these Mistress Factories and coming in for 4. When those things connect, it's going to send Joe to 13. He manages to find it on the D20, and Chris Abbasses the turn back. So Joe draws a new card. We're going to add a green and a white to our mana pool for another wild growth. So we got one white floating, drawing a card off the Enchantress's presence. Now we add two more green to our mana pool for an Argothian Enchantress and an Elephant Grass. And now we're going to trigger two draw abilities. We find another land. Oftentimes, if you can get two card drawing sources, you can land a Solitary Confinement, given you have enough mana to do it, and just spiral out of control with this deck. It is a blast to play. So Chris having a read of the Oath of Druids here, trying to decide if he wants to play a creature. But he's going to get a trigger on his upkeep because it does target your opponent. So he's going to decide whether or not he wants to start flipping cards till he gets something. Which he's got some pretty good options as well. I think these two are talking it over here to see whether or not it's a mandatory thing, and I don't believe it is. I think it says may. Chris opts to skip the Oath of Druids, play a Flooded Strand, and go searching for a land. Probably an island in this case. We're going to give him a minute to shuffle up and see where he goes with this. All the land in the world. Alright, so we're going to add a red, a white, a colorless, and a blue. Lightning Angel it is, everybody. Welcome to the party. But we have an Elephant Grass on Joe's side of the field there, so he's either going to have to take a point off that City of Brass or let it sit and see what happens next turn. I think we've decided we're going to pass the turn back. Joe is going to go digging for another enchantment to put on top of that Sterling Grove. We find a Worship. That's going to be incredibly difficult to deal with if he finds another Sterling Grove. Because Argothian Enchantress has Shroud. So Joe's going to go ahead and land that Worship, and he's going to draw a couple cards. He finds a Brushland. Not many people are fans of this art in Brushland, and it is actually one of my favorite of the Ice Age Painlands. I think it's pretty great. Doesn't look like Chris has any responses here to the landing of Worship. Although he could target it with Disenchant if he had it in hand right now. So Joe passes the turn back to Chris. Draws a fresh card. Looks like he's found a Worship of his own. Now we're thinking it over. We've got a couple of Mishra's Factories here, but again, we have that tax on attacking with that Elephant Grass, so that kind of chokes us on what we can do here. Joe's at a pretty healthy life total at 13. So Chris is going to go ahead and pay the tax, swing on in for 3 with that Lightning Angel, and send Joe to 10. And we're passing the turn. So Joe pays a cumulative upkeep on the Elephant Grass to keep that tax going. That pseudo green propaganda. Joe finds 2 mana for Fertile Ground. Gets 2 draw triggers here and finds another land. So now we're going to add 3 mana to our pool. Playing another Enchantress's Presence and draw 2 cards. So now we're drawing 3 for every enchantment that he plays. And he's going to send it on back over to Chris. Chris has managed to find an Exalted Angel now. We're going to opt a Portent right now. Take a look at the top 3 here. Are we going to keep them or are we going to shuffle? Looks like we might be keeping them, everybody. Counting our cards in hand and see what options we have available to us. We're going to pay the tax on Elephant Grass and swing in for another 3, sending Joe to 7. But again, that worship is going to be a big part of the game plan here because he can't go below 1 so long as Joe has a creature. So we're going to have to find some way to either get rid of the worship or get rid of the Enchantress. Joe's opting to let the Elephant Grass go here. He finds Sarah's Sanctum, and that is going to be good for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. So Joe's adding 3 here. Remember, we get 3 draw triggers for every enchantment now. So now we have 4 mana in the pool. Joe grabbing dice to keep track of what's going on here. Looks like Fertile Ground added 1 red to his mana pool somewhere in there. So Joe plays Words of War, which allows him to skip draws in order to deal direct damage to Chris for every single one that he skips with payment. But Chris is going to go ahead and memory lapse this thing and put it back on top. Joe looking for ways to draw that to get it back out there while he can. Sterling Grove will do it. So he's going to get that Words of War back along with 2 other cards. Now all of his other enchantments have Shroud. So now Worship has Shroud and Argothian Enchantress has Shroud. Which is going to be problematic. So Joe adds effectively 10 million mana to his mana pool now. I'm sure he's going to count it up. Looks like it was 8, but close enough. And finds a Seal of Cleansing. Draws 3 more. Joe likely figuring out what else he can cast with all this mana. Which should be pretty much anything in the deck at this point. We're going to use some of that mana. Find another draw effect in Enchantress's Presence. Once you get to this point with this deck, every draw is pretty much like Christmas. So now we find a Karmic Justice, which I believe allows Joe to destroy a permanent anytime one of his own is destroyed. And he has pretty much initiated the lock with this deck at this point. It would be really difficult for Chris to get out of this. Looks like Joe is sorting out his hand and discarding down to 7. Got to figure out which 7 are the most important to keep at this point. Alright, so the top of the stack that he chucked there is City of Brass. I don't know what else is behind it. But if Joe doesn't think they're important, they're probably not. So Chris can untap here and try to figure a way out of this prison. I believe he drew a lightning bolt for the turn. We don't have elephant grass to deal with anymore. So he could, in theory, come crashing across with a bunch. But again, worship is kind of a problem. And I don't recall that Chris has anything to get rid of all enchantments. Something like a Tranquil Domain or Tranquility or anything of that sort. Those two discussing the lack of elephant grass on the field any longer. Chris is trying to figure out a way to navigate this this mess that Joe has created for him. Alright, so we're going to cycle Decree of Justice and draw a card. I think he picked up a portent off of that. I think we can take a look at the top 3, but I'm not so sure that it's going to go anywhere. Alright, so we're going to activate Mishra's Factory. We're going to come across for 5. Joe's going to go to 2. I'm sorry. We decided to activate Seal of Cleansing, so that's going to take care of Mishra's Factory, so it's only going to take 3 and go to 4. Chris is going to pass the turn back to Joe. And if everybody recalls, he has that, likely has that Words of War in hand. Which now he's going to replenish, and that's bad news. I don't know what all's in there, but Chris doesn't want to find out either. So we're going to wrap up game 2 here, give these players a chance to sideboard, and we'll join them in game 3. And as we join our players in game 3 here of this first round, both of these players have taken a mulligan to 6 cards, or will be shortly. Joe's already selected his 6, and Chris is trying to determine what he can live without to open up this game, because he will be on the play. Alright, so he opens up on City of Brass, passes over to Joe, who plays a Windswept Heath. Promptly cracks it and goes digging. He finds a forest and passes the turn back over to Chris, who lands a Battlefield Forge. He's going to take 1 point of damage here. 2 points of damage here for a Meddling Mage. I'm not sure what the name is, but maybe we'll be able to figure it out or something by the end of this game. So we've got a Meddling Mage against a board of Forest and Plains. And Joe finds a Swords to Plowshares, so I guess the name is not really all that relevant anyway. So Chris goes right back up to 20. Joe is going to pass the turn. Chris takes a look at one off the top. And he passes on back to Joe, who takes a draw. Joe playing the sweet lands. These beta lands, so crisp. Alright, so we find a fertile ground. Play it. Pass the turn back over to Chris. Chris giving it a think here. So we're going to take 1 point of damage off City of Brass. And we're going to play Predict. This is likely on the end of Joe's turn. Looks like he's trying to name a card off the top of Joe's. He gets Elephant Grass. Chris draws 1 card off of that. He gets a Lightning Bolt. And he's going to go ahead and take his turn. I think that is a new art impulse in his hand. And he passes the turn back on over to Joe. Joe promptly taps 3 mana here. He finds an Enchantress's Presence, trying to get that engine online. And a Seal of Cleansing. And he goes and cashes in on that thing already. Alright, so Chris is going to impulse here. And take a look at the top 4 and select his best card. The other 3 are going to go to the bottom. Alright, we're going to untap and take 1 off the top. Of course, going to 18 off City of Brass. Looks like we might have found a Mother of Runes there, I think. One of my favorite cards from the Legacy scene. Looks like we're going to go ahead and go down to 16, and we're going to attempt to play out another Meddling Mage. Again, not sure what the name was here. I wasn't watching this match. I was playing elsewhere in the room. So Joe's going to add 3 mana here. He looks like he's going to float 1. And then he's going to add 3 white. And float 2 white. Alright, so now we've got Words of War already. That's going to get pretty nasty fairly quick. Alright, so Joe has played an Exploration. He's going to skip that draw and deal 2 damage to that Meddling Mage. Joe takes 1 point of damage off that brushland, finds a Sterling Grove, draws his card off the trigger, and passes back. So Joe's off to the races here. You can see that Serra Sanctum is already tapping for 6 mana, which is ridiculous. It's a pretty busted card. Chris doesn't draw anything that's going to be helpful for the turn. He passes back to Joe. Joe with all this cool artwork and stamps and signatures on his cards from where he makes his way around to all these tournaments. Joe finds another Sterling Grove, plays it, triggers a draw. We find a Wild Growth, trigger another draw. Looks like we might have some mana floating. There's Parallax Wave. So if Joe can manage to find an Opalescence, Chris will never play another creature. That will stay. But he decides he's going to memory lapse this thing for now. He goes to 14. So we live to fight another day. Joe finds solitary confinement. And it looks like we're going to get a concession here. Because Chris doesn't really have a way to get out of this thing. Joe's got a draw engine online, so it's likely that he's going to be able to keep up with that, which is unfortunate. Great games between these two. Two awesome decks. A lot of fun to play. We hope you stick around for round 2, which will be in the next video. Thank you all for tuning in, and if you like this kind of content, please consider liking and subscribing. It kind of helps our metrics and gets our viewership out there. And if you're interested in old school content, I'd recommend you swing by the Orb. That'd be Joe's channel. Super good stuff over there. Thanks everybody for tuning in.